Live, okay. Thank you so much. And I guess these more for Zoom. Good evening and welcome to tonight's workshop, the Norwalk Board of Education. I'm going to call the workshop to order at 7:07 and just acknowledge my colleagues present tonight: Mary Ellen Flaherty Ludwig, Jerry McCready Brown, Diana Carpio, Godfrey Azima, Karen Bakey, and Janine Randolph in person, and Erica De Palma attending remotely. We're joined by our Superintendent, Dr. Estrella, and her cabinet. And we'll start the meeting as we do with our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As always, we appreciate our young scholars for leading us in the pledge. And I want to say also thank you to our kind friends at West Rocks Middle School for hosting our workshop tonight. Tonight we have a very interesting and important update on the safety and security of our schools, our students, teachers, staff, administrators, and the entire school community. And to get us started, I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Estrella.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today's workshop, as Chairperson articulated, is focused around safety and security. We also will be infusing some conversations around bullying, because it's an instrumental component of the work that we do when we think about safety and well-being. As you know, for the past several months, we have been working with the Safety Task Force around our current behavior document, particularly our behavior intervention tool. We shifted from calling it a discipline code to a behavior intervention tool, because we want to make sure that as we think about how to most effectively support students, we're talking about how we can incorporate strategies and tools to help them improve in their practice. In similar ways, when a child doesn't know how to read, we teach them how to read. If a child is struggling around how to conduct themselves or behave in certain environments or situations, we want to teach them and provide them with tools in how to navigate and engage in those circumstances. And as a result of that, as we thought through the processes, we wanted to keep that in mind. So we wanted to shift the language, because the language had a different connotation than the one that we wanted to have as we talked about student behaviors and their well-being and their social emotional well-being. We also had an opportunity to incorporate conversations around capital improvements that are necessary to continue to maintain the safety and well-being of our students, and the team will speak about those improvements as well. So I'm going to ask Ms. Sandra Fayores to join us and start this conversation with the board.
Roland, if I'm like this, are you able to hear me? Okay. All right, so thank you. Good evening, board members. Good evening, Dr. Estrella. And I want to start off by thanking everybody for your partnership, especially Kara, and being instrumental in the work that we do and being a sounding board and a support for us as we always engage in this work of this continuous work of keeping our students safe. And I also want to thank the mayor, just because last year he was able to support us in giving us additional funding. And that's part of the presentation, is what we actually proposed to do with that additional funding. And then a shameless ask for more funding at the very end. But I have my team with me, who I'm super grateful for, and that will take us through the rest of the presentation. but I'll begin just with some quick overviews, and then I'll turn it over to Ryan Harold, who is really in charge of keeping our students safe, making sure that we are prepared in case of all sorts of emergencies. Thank you.
Hold on one second.
Okay, so thank you. So as always, when we discuss school safety and preparedness, and we talk about the continuous improvement of these processes, we talk about it in 3 buckets. And the goals for us as a district is always to increase the surveillance and secure our facilities. It's to make sure that we are increasing communication and making sure that people have abilities to communicate through different mediums, not just one method, and then to improve preparedness. So our goals are always around those 3 buckets. And so then you will see that a lot of our, the way that we allocate resources are in supporting those 3 big initiatives for the district. And every time we're collecting data, it's around these 3 initiatives. So last year in March, the Mayor Rilling actually requested to increase the school security infrastructure by approving a $600,000 capital request. Kara wrote a letter on our behalf, and members were advocating, members of the board. And so this was passed. And the way that we had presented as to what we wanted to do with that money was way more than $600,000, but we'll take it. And the way that we are actually going to move forward is we have already started in increasing the cameras at the high schools and the middle schools. So 180,000 of it has been dedicated to increasing cameras. Door alarms are going to begin shortly. And we're going to talk about the difference between the door alarms when we get deeper into the presentation. But making sure that we are alarming our doors, not just to keep people out, but also to keep small people in, and making sure that we are addressing what is happening when a door is open, and we are not following that single point of entry that we stress in our safety guides. And then we have other door alarms that we want to talk to you about that are a little bit more sophisticated, that speak to other programs. And this, you will refer to them as the Wi-Fi door alarms, but we will describe to you what those are. And then we started an assessment of just our school grounds. And we started to go to every school to talk about what fencing needs we may have. And this is particularly for when children are outside at recess, if there's access where they could leave, like if somebody runs off, or if somebody is walking by, that they can come in. So we started to talk to the schools about what these needs are. And then we will have to engage in a conversation with Parks and Recreation, because obviously those are our city partners, and we would have to talk to them about what can we actually do, and then partner with them. But they've always been great partners. So I think that conversation will go well. So there isn't yet an assessment for how much we would be spending on fencing, but we at least have the areas of needs covered. And then we can start to discuss what that would actually cost and what type of fencing we would need depending on the area that we're trying to secure. So with that, I'm going to ask Ryan to get up. You will notice that we talk about these plans in terms of tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, because we have a long-term plan that we need to put in place for increasing those 3 buckets that I said, making sure that our facilities are secure, making sure that we are increasing surveillance, strengthening the communication, and then making sure that we are increasing preparedness. We will talk about these in the general sense because in telling you what we're doing first or second, we also don't want to reveal some of our vulnerabilities. So whenever we're discussing school safety and facility preparedness and all of those things, we will give you as much as information as we think is possible without us compromising the safety of those locations, okay? So you will see some of the generalities, but if you ever needed to get into details with us, we're happy to do that in a different forum, okay? So I'm gonna have Ryan join. He's gonna sit here, and then I will scooch back at the end of the presentation.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me back here. Dr. Estrella, the board. Extremely happy to be here and excited to be in front of you guys again. Since we've last talked, we've, as a district, made some tremendous gains in securing and really solidifying how safe our schools are. In terms of safety and security, we have almost 36 protocols and procedures and systems, which I could assure you is more than any other district in the country. There's some fundamental ones, the foundational ones that we rely on to really keep people safe. And some other ones really just add to that to really take our school safety exponentially in the right direction. So I'm extremely happy to be here and excited to present to you guys all tonight. So thank you for having me. So first we'll talk about the cameras. So as Sandra mentioned, these are in 3 tiers. We are going to start at the high school level. We've already begun that process. As a matter of fact, tomorrow Norwalk High is getting some more cameras installed. After we focus on the high schools, we'll go down to the middle schools. We did a lot of work at Roten Middle School this year and installed 20 cameras there and some blind spots, and then finally move on to the elementary schools. Now, I will mention that with the cameras, along with installing more hardware, we've also been working with our surveillance provider, program, I guess you could say, software. And within the program that we already have, there's many more capabilities. So it's a great way to increase the efficacy of these cameras and move away from being a reactive tool, after the fact, into more active surveillance to prevent things from happening and so forth. So we're really excited about that. As we move into the door alarms, so this is going to be a 4-phase process. First is we're going to start with battery powered in tier 1 for elementary schools. We've already begun that process. Some of our schools, there's more to come. But the first thing we'll do is install battery powered door alarms on each one of the doors that we deem necessary. After that phase is in, we'll start the Wi-Fi enabled installations. And while we do that, we'll also have the battery powered still on the doors to account for power outages or loss of Wi-Fi. So, the phase 1, these things will not be removed. The door alarms will not be removed once they're installed. They'll stay in place to be used as a backup if so needed. Now the Wi-Fi, once those go in, they'll be all local alarms. So what that means is that if one alarm is tripped, it'll be a notification to our security desk, and then also through email and text to designated members within that school community to, again, respond to the event and make sure that there's nobody coming in and nobody going out that shouldn't be. After we do our elementary schools, we'll move to our middle schools and then ultimately our high schools. But really, we have some schools that already identified as high need areas. So, this is just another layer to keeping people safe. As I mentioned before, we have nearly 36 security systems and protocols, but a lot of it comes down to fundamental things: controlling and securing our exits, making sure our visitors go through the main entrance, and of course, making sure that doors that need to be closed stay closed and be notified when they're not. As Sandra mentioned, we did request funding for fencing, and really, this is a project in collaboration with the city. As I'm sure you know, the parks and the properties are city-owned, so it's a collaboration with them. But just like the door alarms, we want to make sure that we're keeping students safe around the property lines, around the playgrounds. We want to make sure that students are not leaving the property, and of course, making sure that we're cutting down on foot traffic, unwanted foot traffic, people walking their dogs and so forth during school hours. So really, in some areas we'll be adding fencing, but a lot of areas we're just fixing fencing that already exists. So two things that are really, again, fundamental in keeping people safe is controlling your perimeters, controlling your exits, and the fencing, the door alarms do both just that, obviously. Now, the thing that kind of brings this all together is the communications process. So we're adding cameras, we're adding radios, we have Raptor that I've mentioned before. It's kind of our emergency notification system. The final thing is Mutual Link, which brings it all together. The Norwalk Police Department already has Mutual Link, and this will have the ability to have them tap into our radio communications, our cameras, our Raptor emergency management alerts, notifications, as well as communications in emergency. They'll have access to our floor plans. They'll also have access to a GPS location of whoever activates an emergency in Raptor. So this is really when we have all of our systems and structures in place in terms of hardware, this is really the last and final tool to bring it all together, to make it the most useful and the most efficient in an emergency. Right now, NPD does have access to our cameras at their headquarters. In emergencies, we do have designated radios that NPD has access to in an emergency. They have access to our floor plans, but this brings it all in one place in live moments. So we could have different command posts, one at the incident, one at the NPD headquarters, all communicating at the same time in real time. State police, in a large-scale emergency, state police will also be responding in some situations, and they'll also have access to this stuff. So it really brings all of our communications on one screen, on one frequency, to obviously make the response the most efficient way possible. And in these situations, communication is key. Time is key. So the faster that we can respond and communicate in real time, and those communications be accurate about what's going on in the situation, ultimately the better the response will be. And this will require more money. Some of the summer upgrades that we've been working on since we last spoke, we have added an additional security guard to each one of our high schools as well as our middle schools. I can't give enough credit to the work that our security guards do on a day in and day out basis, not only keeping people safe, but being mentors and really building relationships with our students and our staff. And they're really an integral part of the school communities. So I really admire the work they do on a daily basis. It's not easy, but they roll their sleeves up and they come in and day out and perform at a very high level. So I'm very proud of that. In addition to our guards, the additional guard at the middle school and the high school, we did hire a floater security guard, and this is really to provide additional support and coverage. When a guard calls out at an elementary school or middle school, it puts stress on the district. To pull, to cover an elementary school, we'll pull the guard from somewhere else. So we have hired an additional floater guard that goes around and provides support, covers absences when necessary. And in the perfect world, when everybody's in attendance, we have them at a high need area, whatever that school may be at that particular time. So it's really given us a lot of flexibility and taking a lot of the stress off the school communities themselves that lose the guard when a coverage is needed.
And then is it 7 total?
So yeah, so at the high schools now we have 8 total, and at each middle school we have 3 total.
Okay. High school's 8 total?
High school is 8, and the middle schools now have 3. Last year it was 7 and 2.
So yeah, so you added those,
Yeah.
1 in each. And did you add the floater? Is that also, or was that?
So the floaters in addition to the extra guard or the additional guard at each location.
So is it 12 total for the district?
Well, we've also added different locations, but between the middle schools, the high schools, that'll put us at 6. We've added a full-time guard at NAIOP. We had one last year, but we continue to do that now. That's part of the, last year our floater guard was assigned to NAIOP since it wasn't originally budgeted for, or assigned, I should say rather. So we have NAIOP, we have a Carver Center guard at our suspension site, and we've also obviously added a guard at our Sono school. And the family center, so that one was already in place from last year, but yeah, what was last year kind of coverages are now staple points and part of the foundation and really the infrastructure of the schools.
So how many total is that?
So we have
Try to do the math here.
So it seems like 12, but maybe.
4 at the middle
It's
schools,
12.
2 at the high schools, that's 6.
Yeah.
Sono,
Yeah.
NAYOP, Family Center, Floater.
Okay.
That's 10.
10.
10.
Okay.
And that's in addition to the SROs.
Yeah, so I will touch on the SROs, but that's in addition to SROs, correct?
Currently, during school hours are the times of staff. So like extracurriculars at a school time program.
Correct. So the after-school programs are funded by the Carver Center and led by the Carver Center. But currently, right now, the guards cover our school times. They come in a half hour before arrival and leave a half hour after dismissal.
We looked at, going to have them there in the evenings, just being mindful of what happens after school, and number of kids still in the building.
Absolutely. So currently, right now, we have them for special events on an as-needed basis, and we schedule those in advance. But currently, they do not stay to cover after-school programs or anything like that. Sporting events, they do, but not the regular Carver Center after-school program, after the bell and before the bell programs.
The ideal to look into that, when the budget allows. I don't know how much these systems stay up sustained, or the execution of them outside of school hours. Personnel who's trained and responding aren't there. The need for safety is still there.
Because the Carver Center, because the after-school program is run by the Carver Center, its security would have to be provided by Carver. So we can definitely talk to them, because I know they already have structures in place to maintain safety and security.
So all the after-school programs and before-the-school programs do have emergency plans. They do drills. So they do have, outside of the security guard on staff, their staff does train emergency preparedness and so forth, and how to deal with these situations.
In terms of the police knowing all our floor plans, do they ever do drills? The police need to see that they know
Yeah, as a matter of
things
fact.
are and where the doorways are and how they're numbered.
Yep. Sure. So within the, and I'll touch in a little bit about the school safety plans, but the floor maps are provided they have digital copies at headquarters. Within our buildings, there are designated areas in an emergency where first responders can go to get hard copy floor plans. In our safety plan that is submitted and signed off by the police, they also get the safety plan. So it is at multiple locations. They do have access to it, and they are provided updates when we make additions to facilities.
Can I just press a little bit more on the pulling it all together, was called mutual link?
Correct.
Is that in place right now, or is that aspirational?
It's in place in terms of the NPD already has this. It'd be aspirational for us to then get on board onto their communications. So previously we had spoken about increasing or upgrading our radio frequencies. Some of our buildings are on an analog, some are on a digital, but within Mutual Link, they'll be able to digitize all of our frequencies and put them into one spot. So we wouldn't need to have this major overhaul of the radio frequencies and radio communication system. This digitizes it and does it for us.
So, I mean, this is like such a key
Absolutely.
improvement. One of my relatives is, on people call into him, no one has forgotten the name of it, but that's the main problem in an emergency, that everybody is on a different frequency, and to send people down, as we saw in Texas, we had several frequencies and they had to get together. So this sounds.
This would connect the state police, the local police, and the school system onto the same frequencies, commuting in real time together.
Right, you mentioned that was not included in the capital budget that was approved for this year.
Correct.
Are we thinking to include it in our request for next year, or are we thinking to?
Yes.
Okay, because we can ask for a supplemental approval before then, I think, if we think it's urgent.
I think that this is truly the most important and the final piece that brings everything together. As I mentioned before, we're spending a lot of money and energy, and rightfully so, on building our infrastructure in terms of hardware. This is the final piece that makes it all compatible and efficient within an emergency. As I mentioned before, NPD does have access to our Raptor system. We have several members of the NPD that do have Raptor accounts. So they get the same alerts that I get for every school, as well as our SROs have Raptor on their phones. Our radio communications, they have access to it, but there's a lot of manual work involved to use those things efficiently. Mutual Link will bring everything digitized together on one platform, so they're all seeing the same things, hearing the same things in real time, and communicating together.
Cybersecurity infrastructure, just, for maintaining security of Mutual Link, is that you have those systems in place to just be mindful how much of this will rely on systems always operating, being ahead of viruses or whatever, fun things. We have.
So Ralph, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, we have multiple systems in place. We have systems in place for student data privacy. We actually have two: our internet filter, which is LimeWise, as well as another tool called Gaggle. And those send out alerts on a regular basis. Ryan's pinged with multiple of them on a regular basis, as well as our principals. And then in the case if it's self-harm or harm to others, and no one responds from the district, let's say it's on a weekend and stuff, after a period of time, it actually would flip over to dispatch, police dispatch automatically. So they also make phone calls out to us. So we have those. When it comes to cybersecurity and stuff, we have a variety of different filters that are in place for all of our systems. Our data, like I said, no one can ever say that their data is completely secure. I mean, it's like if you think that we're not getting hacked on, trying to get hacked on a regular basis, any network manager would tell you that you're just lying to yourself. I mean, that's just the world we live in right now. And it will actually be the biggest issue we're going to deal with over in technology for K-12 education over the next few years. That being said, though, we've actually put a lot of different systems in place to make sure that our firewalls are truly up to date. What we have in cloud-based is also very secure. I'd be happy to, like I said, if anybody wants to know more about that, that's really Dave Hopp, our IT director, can go through in much more detail around explaining exactly what we put into place. We've actually just, I know that he's actually putting in another appliance that we've just used some of the capital, where he's presenting to ITT next week to, on the city side, to use capital funds to actually put in some additional security pieces. And we also have, the reason we have two-factor authentication for all of our staff is so that we have cybersecurity piece in place. So we cover it on both ends as much as possible.
At the high school, do we have anything that monitors devices for kids when accessing Wi-Fi? That also blocks social media and also. Yeah. So we currently have that in place.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, in this meeting alone, I think I've probably gotten a couple of pings already from, I'm on there as well. But usually we have it filtered out so that the principal, if it's something that's egregious, the principal's actually getting those notifications, and then Ryan could talk to this more, then Ryan's also on those, and they go back and forth. Has this issue been taken care of? Or the student's trying to access a site that they're not supposed to be accessing and stuff. So there's thresholds of that.
The separate student Wi-Fi in the high schools?
No, we have a variety of different VLANs. So we do have a network Wi-Fi, which they're on with the computers for the district. We have a guest Wi-Fi, which they're not allowed on during the day. And that turns on after school hours are over. We have another student, if they want to bring in their own device, but they have to use their user ID and password that they have. So then it's actually tracked that we go, like I said, that filter tracks back to if someone wants to put their cell phone on there. Sometimes people get a little upset because they have to keep logging in, to that, but it's there for a purpose so that we can actually know who it is that's logging in.
Yeah, I know. It's helpful for also attendance, for verifying if you were in the building, just went to class. A lot of high schools I've been in have a time where if you're in the building if not anyone in the building before 9 a.m. is able to log in and access the Wi-Fi, and anyone that comes after can't, even if you have a registered ID, because it just gives a a very clear attendance and just helps knowing who we know is here and who isn't. But it's, from a safety precaution, the question of where kids are, especially in big schools, always comes up. And I found like those procedures helpful in tracking kids and also minimizing adult use systems that are on the same Wi-Fi network getting hacked in. They went to the place where they hacked Power School, changed the grade book. It's great, but they were able to do it. They're on the same Wi-Fi network. But I just started posing questions in mindful cybersecurity, and newer systems and bigger infrastructure.
Yeah, yes, it's actually, we have someone now that's almost fully dedicated to that now as a technician, which we've had to do, but I'm happy to talk about that more in detail at one point or another, or even later this year, if you want to know more about what we're doing.
Thanks.
Great, thanks.
And before we move on, I just wanted to go back to Colin, your point about our ability to ask for additional funding before the next budget cycle opens up for mutual link. And so are you able to provide like a ballpark estimate on
Yes,
that?
so we will get to that point in a bit.
Okay, so I'm jumping ahead.
We're jumping ahead. We'll get to that point.
Topic.
Yeah, and that's why I was asking, depending on how much
Yeah.
it is, we can ask for a special appropriation was the name of the word I was looking
Okay.
for. And I think it rises to that level of urgency, so we may not want to wait.
So towards the end, we will have what the future request will be based on the current need and the things that are pressing that we could do, particularly make a special request.
So just to round out the summer upgrades, we talked about the guards, we've talked about the cameras, we've already installed multiple cameras at different locations. The biggest hurdle right now with the cameras is supply chain issues. So when we put an order in, when we sign off on a particular installation, it does take several months for them to get the hardware and then install them, obviously working around school operation hours and so forth. But along with that, right now, we are working with a company that has already surveyed our current systems and where our current cameras are based on our floor plans. They've identified high priority areas and needs. So that process is already rocking and rolling. So I'm really excited to really start to see that come to fruition and start to see these cameras be installed, along with learning how to maximize the usage of these of our cameras in our systems that we already have in place. And again, a system that we already have. But really maximizing the capabilities of it, again, from being a reactive tool to a more proactive tool to prevent things from happening and so forth. We did add Raptor visitor screening to multiple locations that we didn't have it prior. So we do have it at NAIOP now. We do have it at the suspension site now. Although those are typically low traffic areas for visitors, it's important obviously to have there and still really stand by our foundational belief that we need to know who's coming into the building, and so forth, and why. Along with our visitor screening, we now have our emergency management tool that we use obviously during emergencies for notifications, communication, and so forth. Also at NAIOP, the suspension site, and then the new Sono school. We've purchased dozens and dozens of radios. Again, with that, we are seeing some delays as a result of supply chain issues, but we are able to pick up radios where we can get them and get those programmed and then back out to the schools to be used. But we have added radios to the Sono School, Fox Rung, NAIOP, and then countless to the middle and high schools, and that's kind of a never-ending project, based on requests and needs and so forth. And then again, this summer we did start the assessment of all school sites to determine vulnerabilities in terms of our fencing, our barrier needs, and that project continues to be worked on.
On the additional cameras,
Sure.
32 additional cameras, was that adding, multiplying by 2 the amount we had, or is this going to be, is it new for people to use cameras for security?
I mean, those are already going in locations that we've had cameras before.
Mm-hmm.
So a large majority of those went into Roten Middle School, in blind spots, hallways, staircases, around nooks and crannies, additional ones outside. So we really worked with school leaders as well as consultants to come in and identify where we need them and then ultimately install them. So a large majority of those went to Roten, but we've also added additional cameras to Fox Run, as mentioned before. Norwalk High is getting new cameras. So it's really just building upon the current infrastructure that we already have with these schools. But again, identifying high need areas and starting with those first.
So I'm curious on how the whole thing works together. Would the persons that were the security guards, would they be taking a look at these screens, or who's looking at the screens,
Right.
knowing what's happening?
Yeah, so during the school day, we do have eyes the entire time on cameras. So we do have viewing booths at our security desks as well as within the main office, and then in most cases within the principal's office or administrator's office as well.
Okay, so you have multiple
Multiple viewing
places
stations.
to look at all of the
Yep.
screens.
In addition to two 60-inch TVs in my office as well to monitor them as well. So
Okay, so
there's multiple
sort of
eyes.
like a movie set.
Yep. And then also NPD monitors them 24 hours a day as well. They have viewing stations within their communications headquarters, and they have people also looking at these cameras as well.
Thank you.
No problem.
Right, out of curiosity on
Sure.
the cameras, you mentioned software that can help them to be more proactive
Sure.
in terms of identifying threats than reactive. And I'm just curious if whatever you can share about how that works. This is like AI tools that identify certain triggers that,
Exactly.
oh, I see, okay.
Exactly. And it's a system that we already have, so it's at no cost to us. We're just learning to become more efficient and really expand upon the capabilities of a system that we already have. So the system that we have is, from what I've been told, is the top of the line in terms of video surveillance. And it meant, just to your point, it already has AI capabilities for monitoring large crowds, hallways. I won't go into too much detail about the capabilities, but that's exactly what we already have. Just need to learn how to use a little bit better.
Future is here.
Absolutely.
The future is here. In this room.
Human overlords at once.
All right. So now the portion of the presentation that I'm really excited about and how much work the schools have been able to do in the last 30 days. So Safety September, the schools and really I think that it's a credit to the school leaders, the site coordinators to really make these last 30 days a full push in terms of safety. There's more people involved than ever before since I've been here. And I can honestly say that our schools are literally getting safer by the day. Site coordinators, administrators, they're asking the right questions. They're identifying things that they might not have seen in the past. And we are literally getting safer by the day. So I'm very proud and very excited about that. But in September, we did have one evacuation drill. Every school also had one lockdown drill. In some of these schools, most of the schools, we took an instructional approach with these, and I'll talk a little bit later about that. Our school safety plans, the state requires that we submit school safety plans on November 1st. All of our schools have completed their school safety plans within the first 30 days of the year. We made that commitment last year to really, again, make this a priority, and all credit to the schools to really delivering on that. And although there might be some adjustments to these safety plans, it's really important that we've made this a priority and really got these things on paper to realize what we need to work on and what we don't. A big part of the school safety plans is safety and security analysis, physical analysis of the properties and the facilities, social, emotional, and mental evaluations of the schools and the systems they have there. But again, the schools have really knocked it out of the park and got a lot of work done in the last 30 days. In the last 30 days, we've also had an executive district safety committee meeting. So with that, it's myself and several other members of Norwalk Public Schools. And I'll get into a little bit more about the committees and the structure in another slide. But we had a district executive district safety committee meeting. We've had a citywide safety committee meeting. And then from the district level, with our site coordinators, we've had 4 district safety committee meetings. The state requires us to have 1 per month. We've already had 4 for the year. And again, it was really to get our schools trained, get them prepared, and get them better at what we do. I will say that every drill, every false alarm, every situation, the schools have, we're learning, we're getting better, we're adjusting. And this is real, although we submit our safety plans on November 1st to the state, this is never ending work. There's constant adjustments to the plan, the processes, and the protocols to make us better and make us safer. So again, I'm really, really proud of the work that our schools have done and the commitment that they made early on, and they've all followed through with it. So about our SROs, so last year we had 3 SROs assigned to our schools. This year we had 5. I was just talking to NPD today, and the feedback from our schools around the SROs has been incredible. We now have a full-time SRO at the high school, each one of the high schools, and then the other 3 SROs are split up between the remainder of schools. But just having that presence, building those relationships, having those extra officers in our schools have really allowed the SROs to get back to that community building and relationship building and kind of those grassroots projects. Last year, with only 3, they were kind of more of in a reactive role in the sense that they were supporting schools on incidents a lot of times. But right now, just those 2 extra bodies have really afforded them to focus on the preventative work, the primary prevention stuff, and the feedback from the schools has been nothing but positive and glowing. I can't tell you how many times I've showed up to a safety committee meeting or a drill, and the SRO was already there, engaged, helping collaboration with the schools, and they've been a really blessing. I don't know how NPD does it, but they're batting 1,000 when it comes to NPS. It's quite clear that the schools and our students are the priority of the police department, and I can honestly say that's not always the case in other cities. But regardless of the ask, the timeline, the need, or the resources needed, the NPD has delivered on every single request that we've made in the last year. And I can't thank the chief enough and the deputy chiefs. They've been incredible. So along with the 5 SROs, we also have 5 full-time patrol officers. So any given time during the school day, we have 10 officers assigned just to Norwalk Public Schools. This summer, we worked on getting every single officer in the city a master key fob. So in case of emergency, there will be no situation where a police officer cannot get into one of our buildings. They all have master fobs. Again, we have predetermined resources for them once they're in the building to respond. Again, I can't thank them enough for their support and their continued support. Again, I don't know how they do it, but they're able to turn water into wine in a lot of situations, and I'm truly grateful for them.
And Ryan, with regards to the SROs, so we know that their main purpose being on our campuses is to help build community and foster relationships with students. But that said, to confirm, our SROs are armed.
That's correct, yes.
And our security guards are as well.
Our security guards are not armed.
Okay, so all the 10 security guards are not armed, but the SROs are.
Correct. So within a building, our school-based security guards are not armed, but the 5 SROs and then obviously the patrol officers are. So the 5 patrol officers, they are in a similar geographic assignment as the SROs are, but they're constantly patrolling our properties, and they're split up geographically, so the response time is very short in the case of an emergency or a situation where they need to respond to something. But yes, their main things are grassroots community building and guidance and mentorship, and they have a ton of programs, the DARE program and so forth. They have a big task. I mean, in the sense that they're required to be proactive, but also be the first person to respond in a situation. And again, I just can't thank them enough for their support and ongoing support.
Yeah, I think that's really good news that we were able to increase from 3 to 5. I know that not being able to staff and NPD not being able to staff NPS was a real sticking point for a lot of parents last year. So this is really good news.
The SROs are really in the building more they're not really there for if the building is breached with an active shooter, right? They're not really there for that, right?
Well, of course, they would respond to that.
Respond, but I mean,
Of
that's
course.
not really their focus, right?
They're not there to provide,
Security.
physical security. They're not the first line of defense in a disturbance. Our security guards would be. But obviously, it's an added benefit that they are who they are and,
Right.
and with the skill set that they have to respond if necessary. Okay. So I mentioned before, we do have 3 levels of safety committees. And it really is all about collaboration, planning, designing, and then executing. In a major emergency, the first 5 or 10 minutes is a school-based response, but then it becomes a citywide, in some situations, a statewide emergency and response. So we met with the Norwalk Executive Safety Committee. That's the deputy chiefs. We had representatives from the fire department, the police department, first responders, emergency management, and really we're there to talk through, plan, design the citywide response. In that role, it's after that 10 minutes is up for an emergency, Norwalk Public Schools is now in a supportive role to support the first responders on site. So there we ask a lot of questions, and it's you guys tell us what you need at this particular time and moment. I then take that information, I trickle it down to the school district executive committee, and there we take the feedback from the city committee. We again design, plan, what's the best way. We look at logistics, transportation, communication. We come up with a plan, and then we trickle that down to our safety committee, which is our site coordinators, and they execute at the school level. But incredible collaboration and guidance. Again, our police department, they are experts when it comes to emergency management, emergency response. So I have no problem, taking their lead. They're blindly taking their lead. Tell me what you need, and we'll do it. But again, they've absolutely made time and made it a priority to make sure that we're safe and we know what we're doing, that we're doing it the best that we can. As I mentioned before, NPD is on site at all of our drills, our SROs. We notify them in advance of our drills. They're on site to provide feedback and so forth. So it's been a great collaboration. I look forward to working with, not only the city committee, but also the other 2 committees as well. All right, so our emergency response drills, I mentioned last time I was here, we talked about all the drills that we had made up in the wintertime, and we kept that rolling. We did finish with 100% compliance for last school year. This year, the state requires us to have 10 emergency drills. We've increased that to 12. So within the first 60 days of the school year, we'll have 2 evacuations and 2 lockdown drills. As I mentioned before, every single emergency scenario, whether it's a drill, a false alarm, or a real situation, we are analyzing that. We are debriefing at the city, district, and school levels on how we can get better. Teachers and staff have provided feedback to their site coordinators to make adjustments. And really, these emergency responses are really a community response, much less a school response. So us all working together has just been really beneficial and really speeding up the learning curve in some situations at our schools. But again, the state requires us to have 10, we're having 12. We're taking a much more instructional approach to a lot of our drills. So we're doing more walkthroughs, more, I guess, chalk talk in a sense. We're using our safety videos. Emergency response is not, and drills are not always about surprise drills. Those drills only work if people know what they're doing. So especially in these first 60 days, these first 4 drills, again, the 2 evacuation and 2 lockdown, we're really slowing it down to make sure that people are very clear and intentional about what the response is and what they're doing in these responses. And again, slowing it down now is really going to help us in a real situation act more efficiently and quickly. We're communicating with families. Again, when we're getting away from surprise drills. In some situations, surprise drills do have benefit. But right now, we're not at that point right now. We're communicating with families to try to take some of that emotional and mental stress and burden off our children or families. A lot of times in these situations, parents find out from the families before we get a chance to notify them. So we're getting ahead of the curve, and we're notifying families in advance on what to expect. We're including what the protocol is. We're including instructional videos. so that people are exposed and know what to expect in these situations, even if it's just a drill.
So Ryan, are you saying that we're doing a combination of surprise drills and advance notice drills?
Where we are right now in the school year, we're doing advanced notice drills.
All of them are advance notice?
Correct. Correct.
We have procedures that involve buses and communication to our bus system. Bus drivers, in the event there is an emergency, buses are en route to school. Things that I don't know what that protocol looks like, but or at dismissal, I don't know. Well, in terms of being on the same line of communication, if I was a bus driver, I wouldn't know the school's practicing lockdown while I'm waiting in line for kids to load. In terms of arriving at the time there's something happening at a school building, I don't know how they would be known immediately. It's almost, transporting kids into an emergency situation, if there's a regular void. And it just as I think it would be, mindful, just looking at it from the place of wherever our kids are versus not where school is happening. It kind of almost expands the discussion of just safety for our students, when in our care.
So the buses do have their own emergency response protocols, I should say. But one focal point of the citywide meeting that we had last week was communication in terms of transportation specifically, and creating an efficient communication chart on how we would notify buses. That goes for an emergency within a school and buses about to drop kids off. That goes for we need to relocate students, notifying the bus company. So that would go directly through our transportation director, who will communicate with the bus company, and all the buses have two-way radios. They all have GPS location on them and so forth. So that is something that we're working through to make that the most efficient, like I mentioned before. And I do foresee possibly us including that into a transportation to that mutual link that I'm talking about before. Again, taking all of these different communication mediums and putting them under one roof for efficacy. All right, our school safety plans. As mentioned before, all of our schools have submitted a school safety plan for review already ahead of again, those 30 days are light years when it comes to emergency response. Getting committees on paper, getting assessments on paper, evacuation routes. And a lot of times the safety plan and on doing the safety plan is really a good thought-provoking or thought-guiding process. It forces you to think and to identify things that you might not think of on your day-to-day basis. Previously, our school-specific safety plans were contact lists, relocation sites, geographical information, some student population data, but we've expanded that to include a community profile about the school, the location. The hazard analysis is all specific to where they are within the city. It could be flood zones, it could be near power lines, near the train station, it could be near highways. So each school is required to go through and really analyze what the probability of a situation happening would be, and then we would use that data to determine an appropriate response. The safety and security assessment, so it's about 250 questions. It's yes and no, but it touches on the physical space to make sure that it's in working order, everything from broken doors in a bathroom to rubber pellets on a playground, but then also goes into the social, emotional, and mental assessment. So do schools have crisis teams? Do schools have counseling opportunities and mentorship groups? So it really goes deep into the infrastructure, not just the physical, but also, again, the social, emotional, and the mental infrastructure of each school. Predetermined evacuation routes. So whatever room you're in this building or in this district, a clear evacuation route if you had to get out of the building. With that, it's not just a primary route, but also a secondary route. So schools have identified for every single room and classroom and office in the building, the primary way they're getting out of the building, but also a secondary way they're getting out of the building. Identifying safety committees. So we're really expanding, typically safety committees would be administrators, a site coordinator, and security guard, but really expanding it to make sure that everybody's represented. So now we include our PTA or PTO members, school nurse, custodian, along with administration. So really make sure, the safety committee is only as good as the people that are on it. Everybody sees the building through a different lens, different perspective, with different experience. So the more voices that we could have in there, alerting the schools to what needs to be done or presenting potential obstacles, the better off that we're going to be. So the schools have really put a lot of effort into identifying the right people to be on that. And we're very well represented within each school community on who's on that community. Our Safe School Climate Committee is our anti-bullying committee within each school. The state does allow us to combine this. These are the only two committees in terms of safety that we're allowed to combine. So along with each safety committee meeting, there are agenda points based on the anti-bullying policies and how that's implemented in each school. And then we're clearly identifying our building response team. So this building response team, this is not state mandated. This is Norwalk Public Schools mandated. So these are identifying clear people with intentional responsibilities who responds within the building. In a lockdown situation, we do not have a building response team for obvious reasons. Everybody's locking down. But in the other four responses, each BRT team member has clear guidance about where they're going in the building, who's making an announcement, who's communicating with central office, who's getting kids off the playground, who's checking the exits or securing doors. So we are so far ahead of where we were just a year ago. It's again, we are literally, and I can't overstate this, we are literally getting safer by the day at our schools.
I have a question,
Sure.
and as much as you can tell me. So I'm thinking of an active shooter situation. Active shooter, somebody comes in the building, the office personnel have been hurt. I presume that we have a plan B so that everybody else in the building knows that and what to do. So as much as you can say, just tell me later, that's
Yeah.
fine.
So when creating a safety or emergency response protocol, it's all about layers and safety nets. In particular with communication, if something did happen in the main office, we do have two other measures of notification to notify students and staff.
And the next question is, so in the event that that happens, and there's a child or children, somebody's in the bathroom, in the hallway, not with the group, I assume there's a protocol, and again, as much as you can tell me.
Our standard protocol accounts for students who are not in classrooms, who might be in a common area, a bathroom.
Right.
The protocol does account for that, yes.
Right, you said these plans have to be submitted by November 1st?
Correct.
Submitted to whom?
The state.
And what office is it with, is that a central school safety office of the Department of Education?
It's part of emergency management through the state.
Got it, okay.
Yeah. So I'm sorry?
No, finish your statement, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's not submitted to the state education department. It's submitted to the emergency response, emergency management department of the state.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Erica?
Yes, Ryan, so very often we see on social media that parents are posting about bullying and fighting have escalated in our schools. And I believe when I checked in with Dr. Estrella last year, there wasn't any necessarily a spike in the number of incidents that were occurring. Would you say that's continuing in this first month of the school, that it's relatively flat, or has it decreased as a result of all this added security, or has the time over which the incident is occurring decreased? So what used to be an incident that dragged out for 20 minutes is maybe contained within, a few minutes. Can you speak to that?
Are we talking in regards to physical fights or
Fights,
bullying?
yes. Yeah.
Fights. So comparative to last year, we're seeing about the same amount of fights. It is our one of our biggest subcategories right now through the first 30 days. But at the same time, we're also seeing an increase of things. We've talked about this before. A lot of community issues are playing out within our schools. This morning, as of this morning, almost 30% of our suspensions explicitly state off school grounds conduct. So we talked about social media, and the effect that's had, but a lot of community issues are playing out within school. Now, in terms of response time, obviously, additional cameras cuts down on response time. The additional guards cuts down on response time. And I think that maybe the visual that these every fight is a big melee is a little bit misleading. There's much more coverage on it now because there's a million cell phones. So there's much more exposure to them. But we're seeing a slight increase, but pretty on par with where we were last year, and then in 2018, 2019, our last school full year.
Is that something that we could, quantify for the community, that the payoff as it relates to fighting is, perhaps the same amount of fights, but the time in which, it's addressed and the fight drags out has been cut down 50%? Is that anything that we track?
It is not. The response times are not, and there's a lot of factors for that. It's where our security guards at a particular time. It's where the fight happens. Sometimes a guard could be 20 feet away, but if he has to get through, or he or she has to get through 40 kids to get to it, then obviously the event will last longer. Some things that we do to mitigate that is one of our standard response protocols is a hold, and that's where the building clears the hallways. So all staff pitch in to clear hallways, allowing security guards to get in there. But there's no easy way to quantify the response time or how disruptive these fights are.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So we do have multiple layers. Obviously, we have primary, secondary, and tertiary means of preventing violence and keeping kids safe. Some of the primary ones are we're screening everybody that comes into the building. The tertiary would be the response, the rapid emergency management response. And then a big one is the line-wise, the gaggle, and the announcement alerts. When it comes to, especially, and I'll talk about a few different things, but mass violence in schools, there's data that suggests 90% of mass violence there's warning signs within electronic use. It could be posting, social media postings, it could be web browse searching, could be YouTube videos that somebody is searching. So we are monitoring student activity for a multitude of reasons. Obviously an extreme situation would be the things I just mentioned, but we're also identifying students that are in mental health crisis or social emotional crisis, and we've created systems within each school for these alerts. So when an alert comes through, the school is required to respond on what the action is, to acknowledge these alerts, and then again, really put out a quick game plan on how they're going to address it. We've expanded this from school administrators to include social emotional support. So counselors now get these alerts, social workers get these alerts, psychiatrists in some situations get these alerts. So really it's about being proactive, in addressing things, before they play out or manifest at school the next day or within school that particular day.
Did you say mass violence?
So in terms of, if we were talking about a school shooter, about 90% of school shooters, there's a digital trail or hints or markers before the event happens. So the more systems that we have in place in monitoring student online activity as it relates to our student Gmail accounts and when they're on our devices, again, they all play a part in preventing these things. And that's again on the extreme side of it. But there's also data that suggests the mental health side of things, and not to say mental health in terms of mental health disease, but the mental well-being of students. There's clear indicators on that could be addressed, and if addressed with fidelity could ultimately prevent these things from escalating and again manifesting into our school buildings. This is our breakdown of last year. So I did give you guys where we were, kind of a state of incidents when we last spoke. But this is kind of our year in review. So physical altercations and assaults that is our highest level right now. And again, there's a multitude of reasons for that outside the community, within the community. As I mentioned before, I think that COVID plays a role. When students are developing, especially in those preteen years, 12, 13, 14, 15, and I don't want to go neuroscience on us right now, but there's an important process called pruning. So during this stage, preteens and teens, their brain actually goes through a process where they eliminate brain connections that they're not using, thus making their brain more efficient, much like pruning a tree. The ways that students naturally prune are communication, being involved in activities, learning, relationships, all things that students lost, obviously during COVID. So it's not the only reason, but I think that it does play a huge role into the emotional distress some of the students are under, learning how to navigate and communicate effectively with their peers. It all plays a role. Now, to kind of combat this, or to, in response to this, our schools have really taken an approach of keeping kids in schools, and I'll talk to this a little bit more about this in a little bit, but peer mediation is kind of being really intentional with teaching and developing our students those skills that they lost. And I'm positive that when we do this with fidelity, we will see these numbers come down. We will see incidents go down, and particularly fights and altercations. But off school grounds, there were some 87 juvenile arrests last year. So kids are going through it, not just in school, but in the community as well. And we're really looking to combat that, be creative, but at the same time, kind of bringing it back to this is a human business. We need to educate kids, to deal with situations in a productive and responsible and mature way.
Those were 87 different kids.
Juvenile arrests, there are some recidivism there, but in total, 87 juvenile arrests.
Last year.
And now I will say, along with the lesson I'll say about that, with those juvenile arrests, even the ones that happen off school grounds, we're still required as a school district to go through each situation and determine, does this impact or disrupt the educational process? So unfortunately, the state does lay out, there's some mandatory situations that we have to go to an expulsion, and there is a percentage of our expulsions from last year for actually community-related events. So between the state law, increase in video footage, every situation that happens off school grounds is now video footage. So we have much more information now than we had just even 5 or 6 years ago. And those things alone have increased in school suspensions. Again, it's not so much of if an event happened on school grounds. It used to be school property, on the way to school, on the way home from school, or school bus, school event. Now it's anything that happens in the school community. If there's a tie to a disruption in the educational process for even one student, we now have responsibility to act and to address it. And I think that that is at least one reason we've seen some increase in school suspensions. Is again, we're now, and there's also a digital trail of everything. So I think that, kids going back and forth to the playground, now it's all digitized. Now there's a record of it, and this is being presented to us, and of course we have to act. In a lot of situations it's been beneficial, but on the other edge of the other side of the coin, it's increased our suspension rates or incident rates because it's been brought to our attention and so forth. This is a breakdown of last year in terms of in-school and out-of-school suspensions and our expulsions. So we do have an increase, obviously, from the last 2018, 2019. Again, that's the last year that we were fully in session and fully in person. And it's really difficult to quantify or to compare how this data relates to other school districts, even within the state. The state doesn't release their suspension data until actually the end of this year. So we won't know how we compare throughout the state until hopefully the summertime. But again, I think a big reason for that, or at least a partial reason of that, is some of the reasons I just mentioned about off-school ground conduct. And now that the school's been made aware that we have to act on. So as we can see, last year, 43% of our suspensions were in school, 55% were out of school. I will say that right now, we've put in, and I'll get into this in a few minutes, but we've really had the opportunity to flip those numbers. The idea is to keep people in school, not disrupt their learning. And again, I'll talk about some of the measures that we have to combat that or to address that in just a minute. Any questions on the data?
The expulsions were suspensions that led to expulsions, or incidents that the response is expulsion?
So all expulsions are technically suspensions up until, so a suspension is 10 days or less. When it comes to 11 days, then it becomes an expulsion. I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Well, just maybe I'm understanding the information. I didn't know. So expulsion, if you're expelled, you're out of school.
Is that permanent? Like,
For the
It's a-
year?
for the
So
year?
it varies. An expulsion is an 11-day suspension all the way up to 180 days. So there's a range there. It's not cookie cutter. It's based on several different factors. But if a suspension is 11 days or more, it's an expulsion.
But they could come back.
They could come back, yes. Last year, Dr. Estrella and I worked to get some kids on, I guess, early reentry from that program. There are parameters, so even if the hearing officer, and these decisions are made by a third party, these are not school-based decisions. We simply recommend a student for expulsion and they go through a hearing process, third party to go through that process. A portion of those is based on the state mandate. Possession or sale of drugs, possession of firearm, deadly weapons. And even if these things happen in the community, we still have to act on a school basis. So last year we did have a percentage of expulsions that were based on community-based conduct, not school-based. Now, to finish the point, if the hearing officer puts a student up and gives them 180 days expulsion, if the student, we constantly work with NAOP and their administrators, myself and Dr. Estrella. We review these students on a regular basis. And if a student has met all the criteria to be reentered to the school community early, we absolutely do that. So although they're giving 180 days, we have the opportunity to get them out, get them back in school and back with their peers at our discretion.
So any incident on off school grounds that a kid gets suspended for, the incident involve other school students? Like, let's say I got arrested for shoplifting. Am I getting suspended?
Depends if you had a weapon or not. But the key thing there is, so if you had a weapon, yes.
Or shoplifting?
No. So shoplifting, no. But, and it's very gray and all in, I don't say all encompassing, but it's a wide umbrella. So if the conduct is a disruption to the educational process for even one single student, we have a responsibility to act on it.
That's a state mandate.
Yes.
So
If I got arrested for shoplifting, would I be suspended?
No. So I go through every single student arrest on a case-by-case basis to evaluate those.
So if you went out and did armed robbery, right?
Yes.
Then you, right, something like
100%.
that.
And the validation that the armed robbery disrupts one student's learning.
Well, the armed robbery, we're touching the fact that you were in possession of a firearm. Illegal possession of a firearm is a state mandate. We have to recommend you for expulsion.
Any kid with a gun has to get expelled from school.
Has to be recommended for expulsion. The hearing officer determines whether the student will be expelled or not.
So that's the third party. It's
Correct.
not you.
Correct.
Well, I guess I'd want to talk, just learn more about that offline, because, there's certain circumstances that, pretty much the community school comes aware of the officer report. If a kid's not in school, the only way you would know got arrested for anything less than a misdemeanor would be if it was shared, and if it's incidents that don't directly align with the concern that the kid had in school.
The state mandates the police to notify us of student arrests.
It doesn't mean they get expelled.
Recommend school expulsion.
It sounds like.
The police notifies of a student arrest. I then go through every single case. If it's a sale of drugs, possession of deadly weapon, possession of a firearm, the state mandate is I have to recommend them for expulsion to go in front of a hearing officer.
Does that apply for private schools too? Do you know?
I would assume so. I can't speak to private schools. I would assume so because it's a state mandate, but I can't say for sure. I don't know.
What about if it's a fight and a kid throws a blow that really hurts someone?
If the other person is a
Right.
student,
Yep.
then it disrupts the educational process.
Right, yeah.
So if a student is a shoplifter, and we're not talking about that student's educational process,
Correct.
we're talking about an additional
Correct.
student's.
Correct.
Okay,
I mean,
interruption.
it sounds like if it's a misdemeanor that the student is committing, they probably wouldn't get the recommended expulsion.
I go through every single one
Yeah,
in detail
right.
and determine. So if aside from the mandatory ones I just mentioned, you know, when I was up here previously, I spoke about our superintendent's hearings. Most of these student arrests result in supports and services from the school.
Right, of course.
I look for every opportunity to avoid expulsion hearings. Every opportunity. Now, a lot of that is working with the Juvenile Review Board. So when a student is arrested, they go to the Juvenile Review Board. A lot of times, if we do have a school response on some more egregious conduct, we tie the response to the JRB. And again, that's out of an area of support and learning and growing and understanding that the kids make mistakes. So unless it's one of those main categories I just mentioned that forces me to go in front of a hearing officer, I make every opportunity to avoid that. So before we get into the code of conduct, I do want to take a second to introduce our new suspension supervisor. So this is Angela King. So I want to introduce you to Angela and some of the work that me and her will be working on, and ultimately she'll be taking over. So everything I talk about right now will ultimately fall into her hands to supervise and to make sure that the schools are doing this work with fidelity. So we did revise the behavior interventions guide. A part of that is the code of conduct or school infractions. So just in terms of the code of conduct part of the intervention guide, we took all of our infractions, which are laid out by the state, they're all state coded, and we divide them into 3 levels, level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 is obviously conduct of disorderly, disruptive, insubordinate. Level 2 would be not considered violent, but could endanger the safety, morale, health, or welfare of others. And then our level 3 infraction is conduct that is violent, endangers the safety, moral health, and welfare of others. So we took this and we broke them down to each one, and then so what I did here is we took the infractions, and these are level 1 infractions, and for each infraction, we've assigned a possible consequence. Now the goal here is for consistency, kind of a quality control sense that the schools are handling each of these situations, again, with consistency. These are all designed to keep kids in school unless absolutely necessary to remove them, but the goal is we want to keep kids in school. And then to make sure that schools ensuring that we're following the state policy and investigating and following up and giving kids the opportunity to state their claim and their side of the story and so forth. So what happens here is a student commits an infraction. The principals or the school administrators have the ability to choose a disciplinary response within that framework there. So for example, disruptive behavior, they can do 1 day, move this, okay. 1 day classroom removal, obviously on the low end, up to a 3 days ISS. If a principal or a school administrator decides that the disciplinary response warrants more than what is listed here, they must fill out a request for administrative action form Within that, they're required to produce witness statements, incident description, confirm parent notification, confirm an informal hearing provided to the student, and then that comes to myself and Angela to make a decision whether this is appropriate or not. So along with doing it for everything, all consequences outside of the range, all out-of-school suspensions also need to be approved through the same process. And the goal here is, again, we want to keep kids in school. The state, when it comes to in-school and out-of-school suspension, we gotta look at two things. Yes, we look at the incident and what happened, but more importantly, we look at whether the student is a threat to persons or property while serving the suspension, okay? So in situations where you might have gotten into a fight in school, yes, that was violent, but we have to determine if Ryan coming back to school for a suspension, is there a possibility for violence again? So again, the result here is to keep kids in school unless absolutely necessary. And it's on it's on responsibility of the schools to kind of show why the student would be out of school versus in school. And again, it's all about quality control. It's all about keeping kids in school and providing them with services and uninterrupted education when necessary. Along with this, we now require that every single infraction has documented support, right? So we're all about accountability with support, all right? Accountability is important, but it's only good if we're teaming up with support. So for every consequence, there has to be documented support provided by the school. And we're working with Empower School to expand our reporting. We've talked about incident reporting several times before. So within Power School, we've now increased the log entry to include all of the documented supports that are available to them. So we want to make it user-friendly for administrators, but also we want to make sure that all this information lives in one space that's documented, that we're really building a full picture of the school response, but also the student response to the infraction as well.
Question.
Sure.
How is skipping class reported? How is that? Because I know that there's been issues with, if a child is in class or not, especially in the high schools, that the buildings are so large.
Mm-hmm.
How are you reported? How is that? How are you keeping track of that?
So when it comes to our attendance in Power School, if a student is more than 10 minutes late to a class, they're marked absence.
Nope.
Not anymore? What is it now?
Nope.
Today.
Not as of Monday.
Yeah.
They're marked-
So
they're marked
you came,
absence.
They're marked
you came
tardy.
to teach us, but now you're going to learn something.
Will somebody like to come up and speak about the latenesses? So, but we're using multiple ways.
We're tracking them.
Yeah, well, it's
Yeah.
tracked. So student latenesses and cuts are tracked, obviously next.
So let me just speak to
Sure.
that. One of the things that we noticed with student attendance is that originally the procedure was that after 10 minutes, the child was marked absent. But that, when we changed the period structure to 60 minutes, we didn't take into account that there was still 50 minutes to the period. And we wanted to make sure that kids were not discouraged to go into class, even if they were arriving late, because of this regulation and procedure. So we changed it now so that if a child arrived late to class, regardless of what the time is, they're marked late, not absent. And we're looking at how many latenesses will equate to either, we have the age component or other factors that we need to further evaluate as well. But most importantly, if a child arrives to class, even if they're late, they shouldn't be marked absent. And we had some inconsistencies across the district where some of our high schools were marking students absent after the 10 minutes, which was the correct thing to do based on the regulation, and others were not. So we wanted to make sure that we built consistency, but also took into account that our block structure is very different now than when the regulation was first formulated, and we needed to make adjustments around that. And we have. So we've met with all of the school leaders just this week to make those modifications, because we wanted to ensure that we weren't creating a situation where we discourage students from attending class because they were late.
More teachers.
And you could come forward, because
Yeah,
we
no,
can hear
and-
you from the back.
No, it's okay. So we actually, just talked about this earlier because I just showed them the regulation that now has that,
Yeah.
that new policy, and so we implemented as of
Wonderful.
Monday.
But most importantly, when do you know? Do you find out the following day the child skipped a class? Or do you find out that same exact time that that child is supposed to be in class?
So if I may, so for instance, it's fine, because I can use my cafeteria voice. So for instance, at the building level, there's a level of oversight that comes from central office, and then there's a level of oversight that has to be done at the building level. So for instance, if a student skips a class, we don't necessarily get a notice, because what we do is at the end of the day, the attendance that is taken during second period for the high schools, which is the attendance taking period, we do a review to make sure that it matches the end of the day. So we would be able to see if somebody was there second period, was not there third period, was there fourth period, so that we then point that out. Yeah, we then point that out to the school building that something is happening because Ryan's attendance is inconsistent throughout the day. So then the building principal and that building team has to take ownership over notifying the parent or following up with the student to make sure that that student is accounted for. So we don't get it in real time the way that you're thinking.
And if a child is absent, there's a notification sent to the families.
Absent for each, well, in the high school, it's absent for each class.
Well, in the high school, I think it's absent for the day, but we have today talked to the high school principals and all the school leaders that after 2 absences within a class, that we should be notifying parents, just so that we're also mitigating truancy and then mitigating chronic absenteeism. And that after that second absence, that parents know that, listen, this is a semester-long course. Your pupil has been absent, 2 days. What's going on? Can we talk about it? Because we want to make sure that we're engaging parents so that they know that the child is absent.
So
Sandra, I
you're
think-
present for the day if you're in attendance of, in high school, you're present for the day by being marked present for how many classes?
You're present for the day. When you're present for the day at the half-day mark, it's considered present in the eyes of the state. Like when you attend half a day, you're present for the day. For us, the period where your attendance is taken is second period. So if you happen to go to second period, you're present for the day. It's up to us to run it centrally to be able to say that there's an inconsistency because Godfrey was there first, second period, but then Godfrey was out the entire day. So we do run those reports daily.
I think that's the question. The question is period attendance taken at the
Period attendance is taken. There have been some concerns with inconsistencies, and we've been working with the school principals to address them. So at least we now have a system in place to pick up on those inconsistencies.
For state reporting.
Yeah.
Is there Gene Starkman in all like the high school buildings?
Yeah, there's a registrar, but we have to make sure that we're also doing things centrally.
We're also looking within that cohort of individuals in central office that are supporting that work and really building that team so that we have more than just a Gene Starkman supporting that work, because it's a lot of work for one person to maneuver for the entire district, particularly a district our size. So it's something that I know Ralph and his team are looking into so that we can create additional scaffolds of support around that.
And we're doing more training, even as of November 8th, we're doing more basic power school training for all the high school, for all the school clerical staff to be able to understand it. So we're starting to build more capacity at the buildings as well, so that beyond changing my staff over, restructured a little bit, to focus more on a couple of people focus specifically on data and student information systems.
And I think the other component around attendance that is important to know is that we also, through the school counselors and social workers, Jim Martinez has also started to really focus on looking at chronic absenteeism and engaging in those supports as well. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that work, Rob.
Yeah, it's up to you. We actually presented on it earlier today. So there's school-based attendance teams that every school has up and running. And we've actually instituted just a protocol. So we have the RISE network, which also gives us it syncs every night. So it gives us real-time data on who's in our building, who is not. So if you have a child that is less than 90% attendance rate, then that child is already chronically absent, right? Because 10% of the total days that you are in school, if you're absent 10%, then you're chronically absent. So there's a way to actually see that in real time, and the school-based attendance teams do that on a weekly basis, and there's a protocol that we use. The district does that on every other week for the whole district. So we're able to actually see like which teams are looking at their data, what are they doing, and then we can actually intervene with the teams the same way that we expect them to intervene with the families. So we're able to do that and scaffold down. And Joe Martinez and I partner on that along with Kristen Schmidt, who is our school improvement director.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And then Ryan, before we move ahead,
Sure.
I really appreciate that these infractions, the reports must include some kind of documented support, so that we're not just we're not just doing accountability. Can you give an example of what kind of supports are we documenting? Like what do those supports look like?
So it could be anything from internal referrals, social workers, counselors. It could be peer mediation. It could be outside referrals, mentors. We partnered with the HSC to get mentors in our buildings. We partnered with there's a local company of high school students out of Stanford, and they do free tutoring, free virtual tutoring. We've been working with them. We've been working tremendously through JRB, and not just through their kind of court model, but also their care coordination. So getting students and their families necessary, in some cases, medical support, mental health support. So it's really taken a holistic approach to okay, well, yes, we've addressed the issue, we've addressed the incident, but what are the next steps? Where are we going to go from here? How are we really developing these skills to prevent it from happening again? And the list is long, and for each kid, it's different. It could be safety plans. It could be it could be restorative justice. It could be restorative circles. It could be reentry meetings. So just really bringing the human element back into how we're responding to these incidents, and not just dishing out disciplinary action, but really supporting and teaching and encouraging these kids to grow and develop in these skills for them to ultimately be successful within the school and in life.
Are you finding that we have a number of homeless children?
I do not have the temporary housing numbers.
Homeless? Well, that's my department too, so you guys are like in luck.
So I'm thinking of
I could just add
but the characteristics that you're mentioning are all, a child that is homeless has so many destructive occurrences happening that it could put them into chronic absenteeism or falling asleep in class. So I'm just wondering, how are we in Norwalk?
So we haven't seen an increase from last year, because when you enter the provisions of McKinney-Vento, you actually stay under that provision for the whole year. So we haven't had, I think this year we had 1 or 2 students added that moved into a neighborhood shelter, but it hasn't been a greater number than we've had in the past. And a lot of students that were from last year stayed on for an additional year. So our numbers for McKinney-Vento are actually not really representative of students who are housing insecure. So for instance, students who are housing insecure, if you're doubled up, you're considered housing insecure. So we have many families in Norwalk that are doubled up, but don't necessarily take advantage of the McKinney-Vento provisions because they probably get those services like transportation services or free and reduced lunch, which is what the services used to be. We provide it for everybody.
Yes.
So I don't think that they are actually coming forward to say that I'm suffering from housing insecurity, because we do offer a lot of those services now anyhow. So we haven't seen an increase, but we also haven't seen a decrease.
So is it like dozens of people?
It's probably between a dozen to 20 students that qualify for the provision. But like I said, I don't think that that represents actually how many families suffer from housing insecurity by the definition of the law.
Right.
Any other aspects of my department you'd like to explore while I'm sitting here? So we're going to skip forward to just covering bullying. We wanted to make sure that we took some time to do that.
And kind of just one thing I want to add on to your previous question. In most situations, our most, I'll say violent, egregious, my first call is Jim Martinez. As we all know, he leads mental health and counseling. He is the first call, even before Sandra sometimes. I'm calling him to figure out what can we do to support this family and these students. And we find that the student is struggling, usually the family is struggling as well. So it's a full wraparound approach to get everybody necessary supports, and we take all of those situations into consideration when determining a disciplinary action or response. So just want to update you guys on bullying. The last time we were here, we were at 6 confirmed bullying cases for the year. We did finish the year at 7. But the point I want to drive home here is, regardless of the bullying title or what it's labeled, we're really approaching everything with the same fidelity. So if a student comes in and files a bullying report, immediately we're doing a safety plan for that student. So we're determining, identifying who they can go speak to. Do they need services? They need social emotional support. We're doing peer mediations, conflict resolution. We're doing everything possible to address the bullying, regardless of what the investigation results in. So even situations that don't get labeled as potential bullying or not their bullying accusations, we're really taking this approach, and I want to drive this home. We're taking this approach with every single scenario. We are providing students every opportunity to feel safe physically, emotionally, and mentally through a multitude of programs and different processes.
So this was my favorite slide, which is, what do we still need? What do we still need? So we had made a request last year. We got some of that request, but as you could see, a lot of the way that we have to approach this is by piecemealing it, for lack of better terms, and actually having a tiered system for how we increase, not just one area at a time, but increasing all 3 areas. And so we do need an additional $350,000 for the cameras that we have assessed. We need, for the door alarms, and we need another $700,000 just for the door alarms, because we discovered a more sophisticated way to make sure that our doors are being monitored. And then the other one, the communications that we've been talking about, that initial cost is $440,000, and then there is a licensing cost that comes with that afterward. So those are our original asks. It's the 1.3 million or so that we continue to ask for, and really just want to drive home that school safety is a shared responsibility.
And an urgent one.
Yes.
We've mentioned that it's called Mutual Link.
Mutual Link,
is
yeah.
this sort of an encompassing system that connects local law enforcement, state law enforcement, so we want to be linked into that as well. I wonder, just thinking about like the technology we're using for cameras and door alarms, is there a way to kind of scale that up so that we can sort of think of it as a holistic city plan, not just school buildings, but city buildings, including City Hall and other places we might want to secure, so that we can, one, get an economies of scale and maybe get sort of preferential pricing, but also demonstrate the shared aspect of that it's not, quote unquote, just school buildings, but that this is something that we can think about across the city of Norwalk. So
obviously I can't speak to the other departments within the city, but I will say that the initial meeting I had with the Norwalk Police Department, Michelle DeLuca from Emergency Management was there and approaching it from the city side. So ideally, this would obviously work best with all the city agencies working together on the same program.
So we'll continue that conversation. We'll definitely bring this up.
As you recall, when we made the initial request, it was an initial request because we knew that
Yeah.
as we continue to unfold the need, that we would be able to come forward with more specificity in terms of what the actual cost to continue to enhance what we currently have and add what we're missing will actually cost. And this is part of what we need, but we also have to take into consideration like the constant upgrading that's going to be necessary to keep up our systems up to date. And those are costs similar to when we talk about digital learning and devices, that there's this constant upkeeping that needs to take place. A lot of this work, as we think about our budgets and how we structure our budget for the upcoming year and years to come, we have to also take into account the things that the infrastructure we need to build for how to maintain that infrastructure over time. Because even recently, we have cameras that have needed modification because they're outdated and they really don't give us the data that we need or the visuals we need to really make informed decisions around safety and security.
Yeah, especially with cameras, a large majority, I wouldn't say majority, but a large portion of our cameras is actually replacement cameras for these old analog ones that were state of the art only 10 or 12 years ago, but are now virtually obsolete. As it relates to Mutual Link, I specifically asked, how long is this gonna, they anticipate 8 to 10 years before it's outdated. But they're already working on a new server and upgraded information already. Mutual Link comes out with an updated server every 18 to 24 months.
Yeah.
I have a general question or first a comment that the presentation on the safety was really wonderful. I have the sense of almost that you and the whole community were turbocharged on this to really make some improvements. And I've been impressed with Kara this year, and I'm wondering, it's a community effort. And I'm wondering, I heard you talk about the mayor and then the police, how much of an impact was the parent group on how you proceeded?
Sure. I mean, we're always using feedback from families and students. We dove into the survey data from last spring on how people felt. We're constantly taking feedback from staff who are in the buildings dealing with certain situations every day. So it's really, again, taking in feedback from everybody and making community decisions rather than just, school safety or operations or district decisions.
And there was a parent safety committee, wasn't there, of some sort? And
Yeah,
I'm
we were
wondering if that
actually
was.
gonna discuss, oops, sorry, I skipped one. But we actually wanted to bring up that we are starting our task force again, and that is the task force I believe that you are referring to, and getting that started. I think our first date is coming up in November. And we do get invited to go to PTAs and to actually go to the schools, and we're always open to that also. So gathering feedback from those forums and then having parent representation during these task forces will also help just give us that feedback. I think that you're
Yes, that's
talking
what
about.
That's what I'm trying to have you express exactly how the community came together, and the parents is an important part.
True.
Go team.
So then we are getting the task force started again. You guys will, some of you guys are members of that task force. The behavior interventions guide that we worked on is live, so you're welcome to go peruse it. Robert Pennington was doing that and giving us kudos for that work. So it's been translated, it's live under our department, under the safety tab. So please go see the fruit of that labor. That's largely what we concentrated on last year. And this group has asked some questions throughout, but we did reserve time for questions.
I think we got ahead of you in essence. From
That's okay.
Yeah, no problem.
That's okay.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any lingering
So I would
questions.
just
but-
say, what's the plan B? If we don't make the request and you don't get the money, right?
What is the plan B?
Yeah, what's the plan B?
We will get the money, and we will, through strong
Is
advocacy.
always looking for private dollars to
Yes.
support, looking for grant
Grants.
opportunities.
Mhm.
We're constantly fishing
Because it
for
seems like it's something
resources
important.
outside of the public dollar, right? To find better ways in which we can resource programs.
So I'm not sure if this is a fair question, but I was really tantalized by the beginning of the presentation saying that we're becoming such a safe area with these, the mutual connecting all of
Different agencies.
the agencies in real time. And I'm just curious, is this happening at every school system? I mean, is it happening? We've had these tragic occurrences just this year within months, and that in Texas, clearly, they did not have all their connections together. So is this a wave that will go through all the schools to help get
Yeah, I mean,
your command centers all on one real
so I
time?
mean, I guess the best way is that we're learning from situations where they happen in Newark or not.
Yes.
So we're learning from the mistakes or unfortunate circumstances of other communities to stay ahead of it to make sure it doesn't happen here. I do think that eventually schools will catch up to this, but where we are now, we're already far, far ahead of many, many school districts within this country. Between, again, our primary, secondary, and tertiary measures around school safety, that number in the dozens, we are way ahead of where other school districts are.
And in Connecticut, is it,
I would guarantee that we have some of the most intricate protocols and procedures within the country.
good to hear.
So, if there are no further questions, we're gonna now move into the bullying prevention in our schools conversation, which ties to the work around safety and security. And Robert Pennington will walk us through some of these things.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Guys, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening, members of the board. So we were able to hear Ryan talk a lot about the bullying policy, reporting procedures, and investigation procedures. But I think one of the key pieces is also talking about the work that we are doing around prevention. And he actually talked a lot about how our counselors and how our social workers are really working with students throughout different situations and being really interconnected. And one of the great things that we've been able to do as a community is really start to be able to connect with our community agencies as well. So because we have so many counselors, and being able to say, if there is this situation, how can we connect this student, this family with one of our providers to be able to support them? And that we've done a lot of work in building that capacity of our counselors and social workers. And I mean, over the last year, they have been really working tremendously hard to support all of our students. So some of the work that I'm going to talk about are things that we have highlighted throughout the last year or so, and I'm going to talk about some of the work as we continue to move forward, because I do think it's really important to see how we are continuing to evolve as a district. I mean, we talk about the social emotional learning that we have embedded, and we have different programs that our schools are using, such as Second Step, which really has an anti-bullying unit built into the program. And we think that that is really important as we work with our students. The trauma-informed care training that all of our certified staff have participated in, and they get refreshers, so that we're constantly working with our teachers and our school personnel around how we can best support students and work with students, like if there is something occurring. And coming this October and in November, our paraeducators will be participating in this same trauma-informed care training, because a lot of these trainings have occurred after school when our paraeducators, they go home, like they do not stay for faculty meetings or professional learning after school. So we want to make sure that all of our certified and non-certified staff are really able to have that type of a training in trauma-informed care, which is really important for us. And then we have check-ins built in. We were selected from the state to be able to use the DESA survey and to be able to check in with students, and being able to see areas where our counselors, our social workers can then see how students are doing and being able to be proactive versus reactive. One of the other layers that I do want to mention is that as a district, we added counselors to all of our elementary schools, which was not something that we had prior to this year. And a lot of our counselors are working in the elementary schools around some of these SEL lessons. They're pushing in, they're working with groups of students. And so this is really going to be crucial work in our elementary schools that we just didn't have prior to this year. We also added clinicians at all of the 5 middle schools. We've been able to add Mid-Fairfield Community Center, they changed their name, and Dr. Estrella really worked with Mid-Fairfield so that we're able to add a clinician at each of our middle schools on top of the counseling supports that we have. So
Is that full day?
it is, it's full, it's a full-time position.
Full-time.
And so each Conus, Roten, Westrox, Nathan Hale, and CMS will all have supports, which is, and we added them last year to our high school. We added the clinicians, one at each of the 2 comprehensive high schools, but we saw a lot of work in our middle school. So using that data, we were able to say, we need to add another level of support in our middle schools.
In addition to
what we have, we didn't lose anything. We were able to add in the clinicians at the middle school level, which we're really excited about, just being able to provide that type of support. And one of the things that the clinicians can do is they also, the students they're working with, they also can provide like family support and going to the home and being able to do some of that wraparound services that we've talked a lot about as a district, is how can we support, the whole child, the whole family.
Quick question, Rob.
Sure.
Look at things like trauma-informed care and restorative practices. How integrated has that been with, for example, the work that Dr. Fergus has been doing throughout the district in helping us all understand, the experiences of our students from an equity lens?
So I think that between Dr. Fergus and Dr. McBride, we've really been able to interconnect the two. I think at one point, these approaches were in isolation. And so now we're really trying to integrate all of this work. So it's not just this here and this there, and we're doing 2 separate things, but really making it more of a holistic approach where schools are able to interconnect the 2 work and the 2 works into one. So last year we talked, and there was an article in the paper about the Wingman Youth Leadership Program that we started. And so last year was really our kickoff work. So we're really excited to see some of this work as we move into this year, working and with our creating student leaders, because that's also something that we have heard a lot about, especially in our secondary level, is how do we build the ownership of students? And so that's what the Wingman Foundation does, is it really is embedded in building student leaders to be able to work. And I think Ryan talked a little bit about peer mediation and some of that work. And so those both are interconnected. We are also.
Do we have that in high schools?
It's in our high schools and our middle schools. And this year we're going to really expand upon that work, but we're also piloting the Wingman at one of our elementary schools. So Fox Run has taken that on as an opportunity to build student leaders in the elementary school. And as we see how that goes, we're hoping we're going to be able to scale that to our elementary schools as well. because that is an area that I think we've heard from students. Dr. Estrella, Dr. McBride's visits, they're always talking with students and really helping them be part of the team and being part, taking ownership. So, and that's what this youth leadership program is all about.
Was this something that they had looked for volunteers in the school and just did a program that way, had the kids come forward that were interested?
So the first group was worked through the counseling department, and they were able to work with students and different from all different grades, all different groups of students. So they worked out, I know that an example, one of the schools looked at some of the football players to join this group. And then they worked with a different group to see if they wanted to join. And the goal is to build it so that we have multiple groups of Wingman youth leaders. But it went through the counseling department. So,
And sorry, Rob, before you move on, I see Sandy Hook Promise on here.
yeah, that's where this is from.
Okay, so it's a Sandy Hook.
Yes.
It's from Sandy Hook.
100%. Ian Huxley is the person who created the Wingman Foundation. His son was Dylan.
You said Ann?
Ian, yes.
Ian.
And he,
Right.
he's been great. He's been a great partner. I've been on multiple meetings with him.
Yeah.
And he really, and this idea of just trying to create student-to-student leaders,
Right.
because it means so much more when it comes from a student versus when it comes from
Right.
other adults.
But the Sandy Hook Promise program, I know that's a separate program that's actually run by his wife, his ex-wife. And I think that's something that we've had before at the middle schools. Is that something we're still?
So we just had Roten Middle School just did start with Hello Week,
No, okay.
which is also like interconnected, and they had a whole series of events throughout the whole week.
Okay, good.
So, but different schools are taking on different projects and different connections, but they're all interconnected with, they're all part of that. So. And then we talked last year about the Triangle Community Center, and we had our counselors, social workers, and psychologists. They went through a 4-part training series to be Affirm Me, for students to be able to go and really be experts to support, and so that students know that they have someone that they can go to and talk with. All of our secondary schools went through the 101 training last year, and this year, all of our elementary schools are going through the 101 training as well. So the Triangle Center goes to the school and provides training for the entire staff. We are hoping to roll out a 201 training for our secondary schools, because it can't just be a one and done. We know that. And then the other layer is student direct services. And so through an ARP grant, the Triangle Center, they actually were provided dollars to provide clinicians in our schools. And so that they will have office hours at our high schools and be able to be a support. They can include therapy, and this is another level of not just working with staff, but a way that we can work with our students as well.
So is this intermittent, these clinicians, or it's not the same?
It's not the same.
Yeah, but is it steady or is it intermittent in
So they'll set up
emergencies?
certain office hours at each of the schools, because I don't know if they're gonna have like one person that's gonna go to Norwalk High so many hours of the week, and then Brian McMahon or CGS or P-Tech. So they're working on setting up those office hours now. But that was through them, and they really used the youth survey data to help to create this. And then as we're going to be giving that survey again this year, they're going to be able to use that data in some of the work that they're going to be working with our students. So it's just another level of support as we look to support all students. And then we talked a little bit last year just about new SEL initiatives, and we've had mindfulness, we've had some yoga. And so different schools are really looking to bring in these experiences for our students and really trying to just create this level of calmness, mindfulness, and making that go throughout the entire school day.
Are we, when we think about communicating with families and parents, is there a special strategy that we're using to help people understand? Because these are great, by the way, thank you. And, for me, it's a question of making sure that one, community is aware, and two, that they understand the importance of it. Sometimes people may hear certain words and phrases and not understand what they actually mean for their children's educational success. So, I don't know if there's a particular communication strategy that we're using to help them, understand and get on board.
And I think that another layer that we found last year is not just communicate in the high school in particular, not just communicating with families, but also making sure that we're communicating with our students.
Yes.
Because the students need to know what is available. Like if there is a clinician that can support and they go to the counseling center and they don't know that this person's even there, it's not our goal. Our goal is to reach the students. And so we have to really be intentional that when we do send out these communications, that we're also reaching out to our high school students as well.
Right.
So that they know.
I've heard that from some high school students, that they were unaware that some of these things were there.
So we had a number of community conversations with students specifically around the things that were working well, the things that they were hoping to see change in the system. And one of the things that resonated in those conversations was the need to receive the same information as their parents. And particularly at the high school age, because a lot of students self-advocate at that age. So we've made a concerted effort that all communications going out to families are also going out to our high school board, so that they have access to the information. Because what we found, particularly when we were providing these services during the pandemic, we were sending the information out to the parents, but there was a gap in communication where the information that parents were receiving was not also being filtered to the student. So in order for us to avoid any potential miscommunication or lack thereof, we are sending the communication to both.
Is there a way, can we do an MPS app?
We have an app.
Do we have,
Ralph, do you want to talk about the app?
Oh.
Because then we
The
could do.
MPS app?
We could do alerts on that for the kids, right? We probably already do, we have an app, right?
Yeah, we do have an app. It's tied to our website, Gabbard. So that's where like I said, and our social media pieces come up. So if you go on your phone, there's not a lot there yet. It's a newly launched app, but just go into the Apple Store or anything else and search for Norwalk MPS. You'll see that the app, our logo will come up, and you can download it.
Because I'm thinking if a child decided that he or she needed to get some services, they could go on the app, because that's what kids all carry their phones, right? And just,
And that's where also the Family Center becomes an enormous resource to families as well, because the team has a series of workshop opportunities for families to provide information similar to the ones we presented today, so that they become better educated of the resources that are available in the system, and they are able to take advantage of those opportunities. And we're also looking throughout the scope of the year to invite experts like members of the Triangle Center to come and speak to families, so that they know what resources are available at the center, as well as what resources we have within our organization, and how we are partnering with different organizations to provide support for our children.
In addition to that, we're all visual in a sense. Could we have some kiosks in the high schools, with even the students could make the colorful posters of this is available, if your friend is upset, this is something we have available in the high school, just to get it out, something that kids walk by every day. Oh, okay, I don't need it today, I don't need it. And then you think, I saw something there.
Yeah, I think at the point that we're all making is that it's got to be an all of the above approach, because there's just so much noise to break through, and you never know when that message will be needed. And so as long as we're thinking about not just having services, but making sure that they're very, very well communicated.
Well, now that we have a new communications team, we're talking a lot about how we are taking a lot of the practices and great strategies and work that's happening throughout the district, and how do we celebrate and promote a lot of the work. Right now, I know the team is working on highlighting the different programs and pathways throughout the district so that students, one, can click in and learn about it, but also families can build awareness around the different resources that we have. And we're hoping to do the same regarding many of the different resources that we have available, so that we have a number of touch points for our families.
Lastly, I had one question about both of the clinicians groups. Do we pay their salaries, or do they, where they come from,
Well,
pay their
so
salaries?
for the triangle, they received a grant, so.
They received a grant
They
to be able
received
to
a
help
grant
us.
to be able to work with us.
And the,
But in terms of Mid-Fairfield, we actually contract with them.
with contracting. Okay, so they're not, giving us a freebie.
And, well, yes, we've
And the
also
reason
gone
why
through
we're
grants.
contracting with them is because although we know the need is something that will surpass opera funds and go beyond the scope of what those dollars allowed us to do, we needed to make sure that we didn't create a reoccurring expense. So we decided to engage in a year contract with them to provide the services. But as we think about the budget for the upcoming school year and years to come, this is an enormous need within our district that we need to think about how to strategically fund beyond the opera dollars or the COVID relief dollars that we have received. Because generally right now, it's being funded with those resources, but those resources become obsolete by the end of this year.
So Rob, because I stepped up for a minute. So all of these items, second step, rethink, PBIS, ruler, those are DESAT, TIC, those are all different programs to facilitate SEL,
So
right?
some of them are around implementation of SEL,
Okay.
some of them are around measuring and
Okay.
checking data points. And schools are using, it's almost like a menu, schools
Okay.
are choosing.
So ruler is that some kind of a measuring?
No, ruler is actually out of Yale,
Okay.
and it's a way like measuring emotions. And
Okay.
so I know PONUS has used Yale,
What about
has
the
used ruler.
DSSA? Which one? What is
This is a survey, it's the Devereaux Student Survey,
Mhm.
and it's actually used, it can predict students who may need more support.
that?
The last thing that I'll leave you with is that it's anti-bullying month, and so we're going to be having a Unity Day on October 19th, and we're going to wear, as a district, we're going to wear orange. And that's going to be a way, it's to promote prevention, inclusion, awareness, but also that, no child should ever be bullied. So we're going to be doing that as a district. So I just wanted to share.
Wear orange.
Wear orange on the 19th.
Before Halloween.
And that concludes our workshop presentation for the day. Unless you have additional questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you to all the team who presented today. I think we got a great sense of not just what is happening, what we're planning, but how they all the pieces work together to make our schools safer for everyone. So, and it's great to know the kind of progress we're making, and energizing to make even more progress as we go forward.
Thank you.
We do have the ability for public comments, so I don't know if there's anyone in person or online.
There's one person that's watching that may be interested, so if you are, please raise your hand. Going once.
Okay. Well, another great workshop. I want to thank Dr. Estrella and her entire team and my colleagues. And at 9:16, we'll bring the workshop to a close. Thank you all very much. See you next time.
Happy Yom Kippur tomorrow.
That's right. Starting tonight, actually.
Tonight.